Welcome to Poirot Stories, where Agatha Christie's Hercule Poirot brings captivating mysteries to life. In the shadowed halls of Thornfield Grange, a grand estate steeped in secrets, a scream pierces the night. Lady Eleanor Ashby lies dead, a silver letter opener in her back. Who among the elegant guests, her dashing nephew, his enigmatic fiancé, or the sharp-witted poet, holds the key to her murder? As Hercule Poirot, the brilliant Belgian detective, unravels a web of lies, hidden treasures, and buried pasts, each clue, a stopped clock, a misplaced locket, a smudge of mud, draws you deeper into a mystery where no one is what they seem. Will Poirot's little gray cells uncover the truth before the killer strikes again? Dive into a tale of betrayal, greed, and shocking revelations that will keep you guessing until the final twist. Chapter 1. The Quiet Before the Storm. In the golden haze of a late September afternoon, the sprawling estate of Thornfield Grange stood as a monument to elegance and restraint, its ivy-clad walls basking in the fading sunlight. Nestled in the heart of the Sussex countryside, the Grange was a vision of Georgian splendor, its tall windows glinting like watchful eyes over manicured lawns and a labyrinthine rose garden. To the casual observer, it was a place of serenity, a haven for the privileged few invited to its hallowed halls. Yet beneath its polished surface, a current of unease rippled through the air, as though the very stones of the house sensed the shadow of impending calamity. Captain Arthur Hastings, ever the loyal companion of Hercule Poirot, gazed out from the terrace, his hands clasped behind his back. The invitation to Thornfield Grange had come unexpectedly, a summons from Lady Eleanor Ashby, an old acquaintance from his days in London society. The occasion was to be a weekend gathering to celebrate the engagement of her nephew, Charles Ashby, to the enigmatic Miss Vivienne Laurent, a French heiress of considerable charm and mystery. Hastings, always susceptible to the allure of a grand house party, had persuaded Poirot deliberate. Then there was Dr. Rupert Grayson, a retired physician with a penchant for cryptic remarks, and his wife, Clara, whose nervous laughter filled awkward silences. The young poet, Felix Marwood, lounged with an air of studied indifference, his sharp wit cutting through the polite chatter. Rounding out the group were Mrs. Beatrice Langston, a widowed art collector with a penchant for gossip, and Colonel Hugh Ramsay, a bluff military man whose booming voice carried tales of colonial campaigns. The afternoon passed in a haze of clinking teacups and murmured pleasantries, the guests mingling on the terrace as a string quartet played softly from the drawing room. Yet Hastings, ever attuned to the undercurrents of human behavior, sensed a peculiar tension. Charles and Vivienne, though outwardly affectionate, exchanged glances that seemed less loving than guarded. Lady Eleanor's eyes darted toward the rose garden, where a groundskeeper moved silently among the blooms as though she feared he might overhear her thoughts. Even Felix Marwood's jests carried a barbed edge, particularly when directed at Dr. Grayson, who responded with tight-lipped smiles. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the lawn, the party moved indoors for dinner. The dining room was a vision of opulence. Crystal chandeliers gleamed above a mahogany table set with silver and fine china. Lady Eleanor took her place at the head, her sapphire necklace catching the candlelight. The conversation flowed, touching on politics, art, and the recent discovery of a rare manuscript in the Grange's library. A medieval text rumored to hold secrets of alchemy. Hastings, seated beside Vivienne, found her charm disarming. Yet her answers to his polite inquiries were curiously vague. She spoke of her childhood in Paris, but her stories seemed rehearsed, as though she were reciting lines from a play. It was then that Poirot, seated opposite Hastings, began to observe in earnest. His small, neat figure was p.m. when the scream shattered the evening's calm. It came from the direction of the study, a piercing cry that froze the blood. Hastings, standing near the fireplace with Poirot, exchanged a glance with his friend before they hurried toward the sound, the other guests trailing behind. They found the study door ajar, the room dimly lit by a single lamp. Lady Eleanor lay slumped across her desk, her sapphire necklace glinting coldly against her pale throat. A letter opener, its handle ornate and silver, protruded from her back. Blood pooled on the polished wood, staining the papers beneath her. "Good heavens!" Hastings gasped, his heart pounding. "She's been murdered!" Poirot stepped forward, his movements precise, his expression unreadable. He bent over the body, his gloved fingers hovering near the wound, but not touching it. "Oui, mon ami," he murmured. "Murder, most deliberate. And yet, the method, the moment, c'est curieux." He straightened, his eyes sweeping the room. The open window, the scattered papers, the single glass of untouched brandy on the desk. "We must summon the police, but first, we observe the truth. It hides in the details." As the guests crowded into the doorway, their faces a mixture of shock and suspicion, Hastings felt a chill settle over him. Thornfield Grange, so serene mere hours ago, was now a stage for a deadly drama, and Hercule Poirot, with his little grey cells already at work, stood at its center, ready to unravel the secrets that lay buried in the hearts of those around him. Chapter 2. The Shadow of the Crime. The air in Thornfield Grange grew heavy with dread as the reality of Lady Eleanor Ashby's murder settled over the house. The study, once a sanctuary of quiet scholarship, was now a grim tableau, its lamplight casting eerie shadows across the blood-stained desk. Hercule Poirot stood motionless, his small frame a stark contrast to the chaos around him, his sensitivity masked by a blank stare. Mrs. Beatrice Langston, wringing her hands and whispering about curses, and Colonel Hugh Ramsay, who seemed more indignant than grieved, as though murder were a personal affront to his sense of order. The butler, a stooped man named Withers, was found in the servants' hall, his composure rattled but intact. Hastings relayed Poirot's instructions, and Withers hurried to telephone the local constabulary. As Hastings returned to the study, he noted the guests had retreated to the drawing room, their voices a low hum of agitation. Vivienne's soft French accent carried a note of distress as she spoke to Charles, who responded in clipped, distracted tones. Felix Marwood lingered near the fireplace, a cigarette dangling from his fingers, his eyes fixed on the flames. Something in his posture struck Hastings as odd, but he could not place it. Back in the study, Poirot was methodically examining the scene, his gloved hands clasped behind his back to avoid contamination. The letter opener, embedded in Lady Eleanor's back, was a curious weapon. Ornate, almost ceremonial, its silver handle engraved with intricate floral patterns. The desk bore a clutter of papers, estate documents, a guest list for the weekend, and a half-finished letter in Lady Eleanor's elegant script, addressed to her solicitor. The open window admitted a cool breeze, rustling the curtains, and Poirot's eyes narrowed as he studied the latch, which showed no signs of tampering. "C'est intéressant," Poirot said, pointing to the brandy glass on the desk. "It is untouched, yet the bottle is open. Why pour a drink and not partake? And this letter," he gestured to the papers, "it speaks of changes to a will. A motive, perhaps. For someone in this house," Hastings frowned. "But who could have done it? The scream, though, robbery gone wrong, maybe. That sapphire necklace is worth a fortune." Poirot's expression remained impassive, but Hastings could sense his disapproval of the inspector's hasty conclusion. "Perhaps," Poirot said smoothly, "but first, we must question the household. The truth, it lies in the details, not in assumptions. The inspector grunted, clearly skeptical, but allowed Poirot to take the lead in organizing the interviews. The guests were summoned to the library, where Poirot seated himself at a long oak table, a notebook open before him. Hastings stood by his side, ready to jot down any pertinent observations. The atmosphere was thick with tension, each guest eyeing the others as though searching for the guilty party among them. Charles Ashby was questioned first. He sat stiffly, his hands clasped tightly. "I was in the drawing room with Vivian," he said, his voice strained. "We were discussing the wedding plans when we heard the scream. I swear I didn't leave her side." Vivian nodded, her dark eyes meeting Poirot's without flinching. "It is true. We were together. I could not imagine who would do such a thing to dear Tante Eleanor." Poirot's gaze lingered on her, noting the careful choice of words. "And you, Mademoiselle Laurent, did you notice anything unusual this evening? A glance, a gesture, perhaps?" Vivian hesitated, then shook her head. "Non, Monsieur Poirot. It was a happy evening, until this tragedy." The others followed, each offering their alibis. Dr. Grayson claimed he was in the billiard room with Colonel Ramsay, a claim the colonel corroborated, though his bluster seemed to falter under Poirot's scrutiny. Clara Grayson said she had been fetching a shawl from her room, alone. Felix Marwood admitted to stepping outside for a cigarette at 9:40, returning just before the scream. Mrs. Langston insisted she had been in the drawing room, gossiping with Belgian detective would not rest until every secret of Thornfield Grange was laid bare. Chapter 4. The Questions Begin. The grand library of Thornfield Grange, with its towering bookshelves and heavy velvet drapes, seemed to close in around the gathered guests as the reality of Lady Eleanor Ashby's murder settled like a fog. The morning after the crime was grey and sombre, the patter of rain against the windows a constant reminder of the storm within the house. Hercule Poirot, his small figure seated at a polished oak table, exuded an air of calm authority, his notebook open before him, a pen poised in his gloved hand. His green eyes, sharp and unyielding, scanned the room, taking in every detail. The flicker of unease in a glance, the nervous twitch of a finger. Captain Hastings stood by his side, his military bearing tempered by a growing sense of awe at Poirot's methodical approach. The guests, summoned for formal interviews, sat in a tense semicircle, their faces a gallery of apprehension and guarded secrets. Charles Ashby, his boyish charm dulled by grief or guilt, sat beside Vivienne Laurent, whose dark eyes were watchful, her silk scarf twisted tightly in her hands. Dr. Rupert Grayson adjusted his spectacles, his professional demeanor strained, while Clara Grayson beside him clutched a handkerchief, her eyes darting nervously. Felix Marwood, the poet, lounged with a cigarette, his sharp wit subdued, but his gaze piercing. Mrs. Beatrice Langston, her pearls gleaming, fidgeted as if the weight of scrutiny were too much to bear. Colonel Hugh Ramsay stood apart, his arms crossed, his scowl deepening with every passing moment. Poirot's voice, clear and precise, broke the silence. "Mesdames et messieurs, we are here to seek the truth behind the tragic murder of Lady Eleanor Ashby. Each of you were present in this house when the Doctor, you and Colonel Ramsay were in the billiard room, oui? Describe the moment of the scream." Dr. Grayson cleared his throat, his fingers adjusting his spectacles. "We were playing a game. Colonel Ramsay was winning, as usual. The scream came suddenly, and we rushed toward the study. I saw nothing out of the ordinary before that Colonel Ramsay grunted, his voice gruff. 'Aye, that's right. Grayson's no match for me at billiards. We heard the scream and legged it to the study. Didn't see a soul on the way. Poirot's pen scratched softly in his notebook. And you, Madame Grayson? You were fetching a shawl from your room, alone. A convenient absence, no? Did you pass anyone in the corridor? Clara's face flushed, her voice trembling. No, I was alone. I was just coming down the stairs when I heard the scream. I swear, I didn't see anything. Poirot's gaze shifted to Felix Marwood, whose cigarette dangled unlit between his fingers. Monsieur Marwood, you were outside, smoking, at 9:40. The terrace is close to the study window. Did you hear or see anything? A rustle? A shadow, perhaps? Felix's lips curled into a faint smirk, though his eyes were wary. Just the night, Poirot. The air was cool. The roses smelled sweet. I heard nothing until the scream, and I came running like the rest. Mrs. Langston, her voice high and nervous, spoke before Poirot could ask. I was in the drawing room, talking to a maid about the dinner service. I didn't see anything, I swear. This is all so dreadful. Poirot's smile was polite but piercing. Merci, madame. Your maid, we shall speak to her. And you, Colonel Ramsay, you are a man of discipline. Did you notice the time precisely when the scream was heard? Ramsay's scowl deepened. I checked my watch. 9:47, as you said. I'm not one for dawdling, Poirot. We were in the billiard room. Plain as day. Poirot closed his notebook. In time. Outside, the rain intensified, drumming against the windows like a heartbeat. Thornfield Grange, its elegance now a facade for suspicion, held its breath as Poirot's relentless questioning began to chip away at the carefully constructed lies, drawing ever closer to the heart of the mystery. Chapter 4. The questions begin. The grand library of Thornfield Grange, with its towering bookshelves and heavy velvet drapes, seemed to close in around the gathered guests as the reality of Lady Eleanor Ashby's murder settled like a fog. The morning after the crime was gray and somber, the patter of rain against the windows a constant reminder of the storm within the house. Hercule Poirot, his small figure seated at a polished oak table, exuded an air of calm authority, his notebook open before him, a pen poised in his gloved hand. His green eyes, sharp and unyielding, scanned the room, taking in every detail, the flicker of unease in a glance, the nervous twitch of a finger. Captain Hastings stood by his side, his military bearing tempered by a growing sense of awe at Poirot's methodical approach. The guests, summoned for formal interviews, sat in a tense semicircle, their faces a gallery of apprehension and guarded secrets. Charles Ashby, his boyish charm dulled by grief or guilt, sat beside Vivienne Laurent, whose dark eyes were watchful, her silk scarf twisted tightly in her hands. Dr. Rupert Grayson adjusted his spectacles, his professional demeanor strained, while Clara Grayson beside him clutched a handkerchief, her eyes darting nervously. Felix Marwood, the poet, lounged with a cigarette, his sharp wit subdued but his gaze piercing. Mrs. Beatrice Langston, her pearls gleaming, fidgeted as if the weight of scrutiny were too much to bear. Colonel Hugh Ramsay stood apart, his arms crossed, his scowl deepening with every passing moment. Poirot's voice, clear and precise, broke the silence. Mesdames et messieurs lingered on her, noting the careful phrasing. And yet, mademoiselle, your scarf, it is knotted tightly, as if under strain. A small thing, perhaps, but the little gray cells, they notice. He turned to Dr. Grayson. Doctor, you and Colonel Ramsay were in the billiard room, we? Describe the moment of the scream. Dr. Grayson cleared his throat, his fingers adjusting his spectacles. We were playing a game. Colonel Ramsay was winning, as usual. The scream came suddenly, and we rushed toward the study. I saw nothing out of the ordinary before that. Colonel Ramsay grunted, his voice gruff. Aye, that's right. Grayson's no match for me at billiards. We heard the scream and legged it to the study. Didn't see a soul on the way. Poirot's pen scratched softly in his notebook. And you, Madame Grayson, you were fetching a shawl from your room, alone. A convenient absence, no? Did you pass anyone in the corridor? Clara's face flushed, her voice trembling. No, I was alone. I was just coming down the stairs when I heard the scream. I swear I didn't see anything. Poirot's gaze shifted to Felix Marwood, whose cigarette dangled unlit between his fingers. Monsieur Marwood, you were outside smoking at 9:40. The terrace is close to the study window. Did you hear or see anything? A rustle, a shadow, perhaps? Felix's lips curled into a faint smirk, though his eyes were wary. Just the night, Poirot. The air was cool. The roses smelled sweet. I heard nothing until the scream, and I came running like the rest. Mrs. Langston, her voice high and nervous, spoke before Poirot could ask. I was in the drawing room, talking to a maid about the dinner service. I didn't see anything, I swear. This is all so dreadful. Poirot's smile was polite but piercing. Merci, madame. Your maid, we shall speak to her. And you, Colonel Ramsay, you are a man of discipline. Did you notice the time precisely?
Hastings, his voice low. You see, mon ami, they speak, but they guard their secrets. The little grey cells, they are at work, piecing together the contradictions. We must be patient, for the truth, it reveals itself in time. Outside, the rain intensified, drumming against the windows like a heartbeat. Thornfield Grange, its elegance now a facade for suspicion, held its breath as Poirot's relentless questioning began to chip away at the carefully constructed lies, drawing ever closer to the heart of the mystery. Chapter 4. The Questions Begin. The grand library of Thornfield Grange, with its towering bookshelves and heavy velvet drapes, seemed to close in around the gathered guests as the reality of Lady Eleanor Ashby's murder settled like a fog. The morning after the crime was grey and somber, the patter of rain against the windows a constant reminder of the storm within the house. Hercule Poirot, his small figure seated at a polished oak table, exuded an air of calm authority, his notebook open before him, a pen poised in his gloved hand. His green eyes, sharp and unyielding, scanned the room, taking in every detail, the flicker of unease in a glance, the nervous twitch of a finger. Captain Hastings stood by his side, his military bearing tempered by a growing sense of awe at Poirot's methodical approach. The guests, summoned for formal interviews, sat in a tense semicircle, their faces a gallery of apprehension and guarded secrets. Charles Ashby, his boyish charm dulled by grief or guilt, sat beside Vivienne Laurent, whose dark eyes were watchful, her silk scarf twisted tightly in her hands. Dr. Rupert Grayson adjusted his spectacles, his professional demeanor strained, while Clara Grayson, beside him, clutched a handkerchief, her eyes darting nervously. Felix Marwood, the poet, lounged with a cigarette, his sharp wit subdued, but his gaze piercing. Mrs. Beatrice Langston.
The whole time, Vivienne nodded, her accent soft but deliberate. Oui, Monsieur Poirot. It is as Charles says. We were together, lost in our conversation. The scream, it was a shock to us both. Poirot's eyes lingered on her, noting the careful phrasing. And yet, mademoiselle, your scarf, it is knotted tightly, as if under strain. A small thing, perhaps, but the little grey cells, they notice. He turned to Dr. Grayson. Doctor, you and Colonel Ramsay were in the billiard room, we? Describe the moment of the scream. Dr. Grayson cleared his throat, his fingers adjusting his spectacles. We were playing a game. Colonel Ramsay was winning, as usual. The scream came suddenly, and we rushed toward the study. I saw nothing out of the ordinary before that. Colonel Ramsay grunted, his voice gruff. Aye, that's right. Grayson's no match for me at billiards. We heard the scream and legged it to the study. Didn't see a soul on the way. Poirot's pen scratched softly in his notebook. "And you, Madame Grayson, you were fetching a shawl from your room alone? A convenient absence, no? Did you pass anyone in the corridor?" Clara's face flushed, her voice trembling. "No, I was alone. I was just coming down the stairs when I heard the scream. I swear I didn't see anything." Poirot's gaze shifted to Felix Marwood, whose cigarette dangled unlit between his fingers. "Monsieur Marwood, you were outside smoking at 9:40. The terrace is close to the study window. Did you hear or see anything? A rustle? A shadow, perhaps?" Felix's lips curled into a faint smirk, though his eyes were wary. "Just the night, Poirot. The air was cool, the roses smelled sweet. I heard nothing until the scream, and I came running like the rest." Mrs. Langston, her voice high and nervous, spoke before Poirot could ask. "I was in the drawing room, talking to a maid about the dinner set."
Vivian's tightened grip, Felix's fleeting glance at the floor. The room felt charged, as if each word Poirot spoke were a spark, threatening to ignite hidden truths. As the interviews concluded, Poirot turned to Hastings, his voice low. "You see, mon ami, they speak, but they guard their secrets. The little gray cells, they are at work, piecing together the contradictions. We must be patient, for the truth, it reveals itself in time." Outside, the rain intensified, drumming against the windows like a heartbeat. Thornfield Grange, its elegance now a facade for suspicion, held its breath as Poirot's relentless questioning began to chip away at the carefully constructed lies, drawing ever closer to the heart of the mystery. Chapter 6. A Clue in Detail. The morning sun filtered through the heavy drapes of Thornfield Grange, casting a pale glow over the library where Hercule Poirot sat, his small hands folded neatly over his notebook. The air was thick with the scent of old leather and wax polish, but the atmosphere was anything but serene. 2 days had passed since Lady Eleanor Ashby's murder, and the house remained a cauldron of suspicion, its inhabitants restless under the watchful eyes of Inspector Blake's constables. Poirot, however, was in his element, his mind a finely tuned instrument sifting through the chaos of human motives and contradictions. Captain Hastings stood by the window, gazing out at the rose garden where a gardener worked methodically, oblivious to the turmoil within the house. "It's maddening, Poirot," he said, turning to his friend. "Everyone has an alibi, yet someone must be lying. The police are still chasing that robbery theory, but it feels all wrong." Poirot's green eyes gleamed with a quiet intensity. "Mon ami, the truth is like a diamond, hidden in plain sight, yet overlooked by those who seek only the obvious. Last night I reviewed my notes, and I have found a detail, a small inconsistency." Beside Vivian Laurent, whose composure seemed to falter for the first time, her fingers twisting a silk handkerchief. Dr. Rupert Grayson and his wife Clara sat stiffly, their earlier nervous chatter replaced by a strained silence. Felix Marwood, the poet, slouched in an armchair, his cigarette smoke curling upward like a question mark. Mrs. Beatrice Langston fidgeted with her pearls, while Colonel Hugh Ramsay stood by the fireplace, his arms crossed, his expression one of barely concealed impatience. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice clear and deliberate, "we are gathered to discuss a matter of great importance. The murder of Lady Eleanor Ashby is no simple crime of passion or greed. It is a puzzle, and like all puzzles, it has pieces that must fit perfectly. One such piece has come to my attention. A small thing perhaps, but to Hercule Poirot, it is a beacon in the fog." He paused, his gaze sweeping the room, noting the subtle shifts in posture, the quick glances exchanged. "The letter opener, the weapon used to end Lady Eleanor's life, is not merely a tool of murder. It is a clue in itself. It is heavy, ornate, and engraved with a pattern of roses. A design unique to this house, yes?
Yet I have learned from the butler, Monsieur Withers, that this particular letter opener was kept not in the study, but in the library, on a display shelf near the fireplace. A murmur rippled through the group. Charles Ashby leaned forward, his brow furrowed. But that means someone took it from here and brought it to the study. Why would they do that? Précisément, Poirot said, his eyes narrowing. Why choose such a distinctive weapon when a knife from the kitchen or a candlestick from the hall would have sufficed? The answer lies in intent. The murderer wished the act to appear deliberate, planned, and personal. This was no spur-of-the-moment crime. Vivian Laurent's voice was soft, but
A stopped clock and a fancy letter opener don't point to anyone in particular.
Au contraire, Poirot replied, his tone mild but firm. They point to someone who knew the house well, who knew where the letter opener was kept, and who had reason to manipulate the perception of time. And there is one more detail, a smudge of mud on the windowsill, too small to be a footprint, yet too distinct to be an accident. It suggests someone approached the window, perhaps to create the illusion of an outsider's entry, yet the latch was undisturbed, the ground outside unmarked. The room fell silent, the weight of Poirot's words settling over the group. Hastings watched the guests closely, noting the way Charles's jaw tightened, the way Vivian's fingers stilled on her handkerchief, the way Dr. Grayson's eyes darted toward his wife. Something was shifting, a crack forming in the carefully constructed facades. Poirot closed his notebook with a deliberate snap. I do not yet name the guilty, mes amis, but know this. The little gray cells, they are never idle. Each of you has a story, and each story has a flaw. I will find it. As the guests dispersed, their faces a mixture of relief and unease, Hastings leaned toward Poirot. You're onto something, aren't you? That clock business, it's devilishly clever. Poirot's eyes twinkled. It is but a thread, Hastings, but a thread can unravel a tapestry. Tonight, we observe further. The murderer grows nervous, and in their nervousness, they will betray themselves. Outside, the rose garden lay quiet under the morning sun. But within Thornfield Grange, the tension coiled tighter, waiting for the moment when Poirot's relentless logic would lay bare the truth. Chapter 7. More Lies Surface. The afternoon light, sharp eyes darting between his fellow guests, while Mrs. Beatrice Langston clutched her pearls as if they might ward off the truth. Colonel Hugh Ramsay, his military bearing intact, stood with a scowl, clearly impatient with what he called this detective nonsense. Poirot's voice cut through the tension, precise and measured. Mesdames et messieurs, we are at a juncture most critical. The murder of Lady Eleanor Ashby is no random act, but a tapestry woven of motive, opportunity, and deceit. Yesterday I spoke of a stopped clock, a letter opener, and a smudge of mud. Small threads, yes, but they lead us closer to the heart of this crime. Today I have learned more, and the lies, they begin to unravel. A collective intake of breath rippled through the room. Charles Ashby leaned forward, his voice tight. What lies, Monsieur Poirot? We've all told you where we were, what we saw. What more do you want? Poirot's smile was enigmatic, almost gentle. The truth, Monsieur Ashby, is like a fine wine. It requires time to breathe. Let us begin with a question of money. Lady Eleanor, she was a woman of great wealth, but also of great caution.
I have learned from her solicitor, contacted this morning, that she intended to alter her will. A significant portion of her estate was to be redirected, away from certain beneficiaries. Vivienne Laurent's hand tightened on her handkerchief, her dark eyes flickering. Tante Eleanor never spoke of such things to me, she said, her French accent soft but strained. She was generous, always. Perhaps, Poirot said, his gaze unwavering. But generosity, it can mask resentment, and resentment, it can breed betrayal. Let us consider another matter, the manuscript in the library, the medieval text of alchemy. It is valuable, no? Yet, Madame Langston, you, a collector of rare artifacts—
Felix's cigarette paused halfway to his lips, his eyes narrowing. You're grasping at straws, Poirot. I was outside, yes, but nowhere near the study. I don't care for roses, they're overrated, and I certainly didn't kill Eleanor. Poirot's expression remained serene, but his voice carried a steel edge. Then why, monsieur, did I find a petal, a single petal of a crimson glory rose, the same as those outside the study, in the cuff of your trousers this morning? You were most cooperative when I asked to inspect your room. A gasp escaped Clara Grayson, and Charles Ashby shot to his feet. This is absurd. You're accusing everyone now, Poirot. Felix, Beatrice, what's next? Are you going to say Vivienne or I did it? Poirot's gaze softened, but only slightly. Calm yourself, Monsieur Ashby. I accuse no one, yet. I merely point to the contradictions. And there is another. Dr. Grayson, you claimed to be in the billiard room with Colonel Ramsay at the time of the murder. But the Colonel, he is a man of habit, always checking his pocket watch. He says you left the room at 9:43, saying you needed air, 2 minutes before the scream. Where did you go, Doctor? Dr. Grayson's face paled, his hands gripping the arms of his chair. I stepped into the hall, that's all. I felt unwell. The cigar smoke, you see. I was back by the time we heard the scream. Clara's voice trembled as she interjected. It's true. Rupert was with me in the hall just after. He was pale, unwell. You can't think he— Poirot raised a hand, silencing her. Madame, your loyalty is admirable, but the truth, it does not bend to sentiment. The hall leads to the study, and 2 minutes is time enough for a determined man. The room erupted in murmurs, accusations flying like sparks. Colonel Ramsay,
too, it was fraught with deception, and Thornfield Grange held its secrets tightly, waiting for Poirot's little grey cells to prize them free. Chapter 8. The Emotional Turning Point. The oppressive atmosphere of Thornfield Grange seemed to thicken as the third day since Lady Eleanor Ashby's murder dawned. The once vibrant estate now felt like a gilded cage, its elegance marred by suspicion and fear. The guests, confined to the house by Inspector Blake's orders, moved through the halls like ghosts, their conversations stilted, their eyes avoiding one another. Hercule Poirot, however, remained a beacon of calm amidst the storm, his meticulous nature undeterred by the mounting tension. Captain Hastings, ever at his side, sensed that the case was nearing a critical juncture, as if the very walls of the Grange were ready to yield their secrets. In the late afternoon, Poirot requested the guests gather in the drawing-room, a grand space adorned with velvet drapes and portraits of Ashby ancestors, their stern gazes seeming to judge the living. The room was dimly lit, the heavy clouds outside casting a pall over the proceedings. Poirot stood by the fireplace, his small frame commanding attention, his notebook tucked under one arm. Hastings stood near the door, observing the suspects as they entered, their faces betraying a mix of dread and defiance.
Charles Ashby and Vivienne Laurent sat close together, their hands clasped, though Hastings noted a strain in their posture, as if their unity were more performance than reality. Dr. Rupert Grayson and his wife Clara sat apart, her eyes red-rimmed, his expression grim. Felix Marwood, the poet, leaned against a bookcase, his cigarette smouldering, his usual sardonic air replaced by a quiet intensity. Mrs. Beatrice Langston fidgeted with a lace handkerchief, her nervous chatter silenced for once, while Colonel Hugh Ramsay paced near the window, muttering about the indignity of—
Trembled slightly, but his voice remained steady. An argument? Hardly. We discussed poetry. Eleanor was a patron of the arts, you know. It was nothing more. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Nothing? The gardener overheard raised voices and the word betrayal. A curious topic for a discussion of poetry, no? And then there is the matter of your cigarette case, found this morning beneath a chair in the study, engraved with your initials. You claimed to have been nowhere near the study that night. Felix's composure cracked, his face paling. That's impossible. I lost that case days ago. It could have been anywhere. Before Poirot could respond, Clara Grayson stood abruptly, her voice trembling with emotion. Stop it! Stop tormenting us, she cried, tears streaming down her face. I can't bear it any more. Rupert, tell them about the letter. The room froze. Dr. Grayson's head snapped toward his wife, his eyes wide with alarm. Clara, be quiet, he hissed. But she shook her head, her hands shaking. No, I won't, Monsieur Poirot. Rupert received a letter from Lady Eleanor a week ago. She threatened to expose something about him, something from his past. I don't know what, but it terrified him. He's been a wreck ever since. Dr. Grayson's face contorted with fury and fear. Clara, you fool! You don't know what you're saying. Poirot's expression remained impassive, but his eyes gleamed with satisfaction. Merci, Madame Grayson. Your candor is most illuminating. Doctor, perhaps you would care to explain this letter? What secret did Lady Eleanor hold over you? Grayson's shoulders slumped, his professional demeanor crumbling. It was nothing criminal, he said hoarsely. Years ago I made a mistake, a medical error that cost a patient their life. Eleanor found out, through her connections. She said she'd keep it. She said she'd keep it quiet if I helped her with something. I refused, dripping with disdain. This is all theatrics, Poirot. You've got nothing but guesses and a few trinkets. If you've got proof, name the killer and be done with it. Poirot's smile was serene but unyielding. Proof, Colonel, is like a fine dish. It requires preparation. But rest assured, the ingredients are gathered. Tonight, I will set a trap, and the guilty one will reveal themselves. As the guests dispersed, their faces a mix of fear, anger, and guilt, Hastings approached Poirot, his voice low. Good Lord, Poirot, that was masterful. Clara's outburst. Did you expect it? Poirot's eyes twinkled. The human heart, Hastings. It cannot bear the weight of guilt forever. Madame Grayson's confession was not planned, but it was inevitable. The pressure, it builds, and soon the truth will burst forth like a dam. Hastings frowned. But what about Grayson's secret? And Felix's cigarette case? Are they connected? Poirot tapped his notebook. All is connected, mon ami. The letter opener, the stopped clock, the mud on the sill. These are not random. Tonight we watch and we listen. The murderer grows desperate, and in their desperation, they will make a mistake. As the drawing room emptied, the grandfather clock chimed 6, its somber toll echoing through the house. Thornfield Grange, once a haven of elegance, was now a battlefield of secrets, and Hercule Poirot, with his little grey cells, stood ready to claim victory
over the darkness within.
Chapter 9. The Trap. The evening shadow stretched long across Thornfield Grange, cloaking the estate in a somber hush, as the fourth day since Lady Eleanor Ashby's murder drew to a close. The grand house, once alive with the chatter of a celebratory gathering, now seemed to hold its breath, as if anticipating the unraveling of its darkest secrets. Hercule Poirot, ever the orchestrator of truth, had declared his intention to set a trap, and the air in the drawing-room crackled with nervous anticipation as the guests assembled at his request. Captain Hastings stood by the tall windows, the fading light casting his silhouette against the velvet drapes. He watched the suspects file in, their faces etched with a mix of dread and defiance. Charles Ashby, his jaw tight, sat beside Vivienne Laurent, whose usual poise was fraying, her dark eyes darting nervously. Dr. Rupert Grayson, his composure shaken since his wife's outburst, gripped the arm of his chair, while Clara Grayson sat hunched, her hands twisting a handkerchief. Felix Marwood, the poet, leaned against the mantelpiece, his cigarette unlit, his sharp features taut with unease. Mrs. Beatrice Langston clutched her pearls, her eyes flitting between Poirot and the door, as if contemplating escape. Colonel Hugh Ramsay stood rigid, his military bearing barely masking his impatience. Poirot stood at the center of the room, his small figure commanding despite its diminutive size. His black patent leather shoes gleamed, his mustache was impeccably groomed, and his green eyes sparkled with a quiet intensity. In his hands, he held a small velvet box, its contents hidden, its presence drawing every gaze like a magnet. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice clear and deliberate, "tonight we approach the heart of this mystery. The murder of Lady Eleanor Ashby was no act of impulse, but a calculated deed, woven from motives of greed, fear, and betrayal. I have spoken of clues." Silent, the tension palpable. Finally, Colonel Ramsay stepped forward, his scowl deepening. "I'll not be accused of cowardice," he growled. He strode to Poirot, opened the box and peered inside. His expression remained stern, though his brow furrowed slightly. "Nothing but a trinket," he muttered, stepping back. Mrs. Langston followed, her hands trembling as she opened the box. She gasped softly, then quickly composed herself. "It's just a locket," she said, her voice quavering. "I don't see what this proves." One by one the others approached. Dr. Grayson's face remained impassive, though his fingers twitched as he closed the box. Clara hesitated, her eyes brimming with tears, but she looked inside and shook her head, saying nothing. Felix Marwood's lips curled into a faint smirk as he peered into the box, but his eyes flickered with something unreadable. Vivienne Laurent opened it with steady hands, her face a mask of calm, though her breath caught briefly. Charles Ashby was last, his movements stiff, his gaze lingering on the contents before he snapped the box shut. Poirot watched each reaction with the precision of a hawk, his little gray cells cataloging every gesture, every glance. As Charles returned to his seat, Poirot placed the box on the table and clasped his hands behind his back. "Merci, mes amis. You have been most cooperative. But the box, it was only part of the trap. The true test lies in what you did not say." He turned to Vivienne, his voice soft but piercing. "Mademoiselle Laurent, when you looked into the box, you recognized the locket, did you not? It is a family heirloom, one Lady Eleanor wore often, but you did not mention that it was missing from her neck when her body was found. Why?" Vivienne's composure faltered, her hands tightening on her handkerchief. I didn't think it important." "It's just a locket, as Madame Langston said." Poirot
Turning us against each other. Poirot's voice rose above the din, steady and commanding. "Silence, s'il vous plaît. The trap is not the box, nor the locket, but the truth itself. The murderer is among you,
and they grow careless. Tonight, I have set the stage, and tomorrow, the final act will play out. As the guests dispersed, their faces a mix of fear and suspicion, Hastings approached Poirot, his voice low. "Good heavens, Poirot! That was brilliant! The locket. Did you really find it in Vivien's coat?" Poirot's eyes twinkled. "The locket. It was found, oui, but not in her coat. It was in the rose garden, near the study window. But the lie, it provokes reaction, and reaction reveals truth. Tomorrow, Hastings, we will see who breaks." The clock struck 9, its chime echoing through the silent house. Thornfield Grange was a powder keg, and Poirot, with his relentless logic, had lit the fuse. The trap was set, and the truth was closer than ever. Chapter 10. The Reveal. The drawing room of Thornfield Grange was a stage set for revelation, its heavy velvet drapes drawn tight against the evening gloom, the chandelier casting a soft flickering light over the assembled guests. The air was thick with anticipation, a palpable tension that seemed to hum in the silence. Hercule Poirot stood at the center, his small, immaculate figure radiating authority, his green eyes sharp and unyielding. Captain Hastings, positioned near the fireplace, felt his pulse quicken, sensing that the moment of truth had arrived. The suspects, their faces etched with dread and defiance, sat in a semicircle. Charles Ashby, gripping Vivienne Laurent's hand. Dr. Rupert Grayson, his jaw tight. Clara Grayson, her eyes red and anxious. Felix Marwood, his
Turned to Charles Ashby, his gaze piercing. "Monsieur Ashby, you claimed to be with Mademoiselle Laurent at the time of the murder, discussing wedding plans. Yet your hands trembled, your alibis were vague. Why? Because you feared Lady Eleanor's plan to change her will, cutting you from the inheritance." Charles's face flushed. "That's nonsense! I loved my aunt. I had no reason to harm her." Poirot's eyes flicked to Vivienne. "Mademoiselle Laurent, you recognized the locket but said nothing. You knew it was missing, yet you hid your knowledge. Why? Because you too feared the will's alteration, which would have left you with nothing." Vivienne's composure cracked, her voice sharp. "I told you, I knew nothing of Tante Eleanor's plans." Poirot moved on, his gaze settling on Dr. Grayson. "Doctor, the letter from Lady Eleanor threatened to expose your past, a medical error, a debt unpaid. You were in the hall at 9:43, close to the study. Opportunity, yes, but your fear was not enough to drive you to murder." Clara gasped, clutching her husband's arm. But Poirot continued, turning to Felix Marwood. "Monsieur Marwood, your cigarette case, your argument with Lady Eleanor, the rose petal, these place you near the crime. You spoke of betrayal in the garden. Was it because Lady Eleanor refused to fund your poetry? Or something deeper?" Felix's smirk was gone, his voice cold. "You're fishing, Poirot. I didn't kill her." Finally, Poirot faced Mrs. Langston. "Madame, you lied about your whereabouts, claiming to be with a maid who denies it. You coveted the alchemical manuscript, a treasure you believed Lady Eleanor undervalued. But was it worth killing for?" Mrs. Langston's voice trembled. "I'm no murderer. I only wanted to see the manuscript." Poirot stepped back, his voice rising with dramatic precision. "Enough! The truth is garden soil, analyzed by the police this morning. And Charles, your watch. It runs 2 minutes slow, a fact I noted when you checked it during our first interview. You stopped the clock to match your watch, thinking it would secure your alibi, but it betrayed you." Charles staggered, his defiance crumbling.
Vivian's face crumpled, and she buried it in her hands, sobbing. The others stared, stunned, as Inspector Blake stepped forward, his face grim but impressed. "Well, I'll be damned, Poirot. You've done it." Poirot inclined his head. "The little grey cells, Inspector. They do not fail." Charles and Vivian planned the murder to secure the inheritance, believing they could outwit us all. But the truth, it always surfaces. As the constables moved to restrain the couple, Hastings approached Poirot, his voice low. "Good Lord, Poirot, that was extraordinary. The watch, the locket, how did you piece it all together?" Poirot's eyes twinkled. "The mind, Hastings. It sees what others overlook. The smallest detail, a watch, a petal, a lie, reveals the whole." The drawing room fell silent, save for Vivian's sobs and the clink of handcuffs. Thornfield Grange, its secrets laid bare, stood as a testament to Poirot's genius, and the truth at last was free. Chapter 11. The Reflection. The morning after the dramatic revelation in the drawing room of Thornfield Grange was quiet, almost oppressively so, as if the house itself were exhaling after days of holding its secrets. The rose garden, bathed in the soft light of a September dawn, seemed to reclaim its serenity, the crimson blooms swaying gently in the breeze. Inside, the grandeur of the estate felt hollow, its opulent rooms echoing with the weight of the truth now laid bare. Hercule Poirot, his task complete, stood in the library, his small figure framed by the tall windows, his heart that leads to such acts. Hastings nodded, settling into an armchair, his brow furrowed. "It's a grim business, Poirot." Charles and Vivian. They seemed so ordinary, in a way. In love, perhaps, or at least bound by their ambition. To think they'd go so far as to murder Lady Eleanor for her fortune. Poirot's lips curved into a faint, melancholic smile. Love, ambition, fear. These are the threads that weave the darkest deeds. Charles Ashby, he saw his inheritance slipping away, his future with Mademoiselle Laurent threatened. And Vivian, she played the part of the heiress, but her past was a house of cards, ready to collapse under Lady Eleanor's scrutiny. Together they believed murder would secure their dreams. But the truth, it is like the sun, it cannot be hidden forever. Hastings leaned forward, his voice low. "But how did you know, Poirot? The watch, the locket, those were such small things. How did you see what the rest of us missed?" Poirot's eyes twinkled, though his expression remained serious. "The little grey cells, Hastings. They observe what others overlook. A watch that runs slow, a locket misplaced, a petal in a cuff, these are not accidents but signposts. The murderer, they always leave a trace, for no one is perfect in their deception. It is the task of Hercule Poirot to find these traces and follow them to their source." He paced slowly, his polished shoes clicking softly on the polished floor. "Consider, mon ami, the psychology of the crime. Charles and Vivian, they planned with care, but their plan was flawed by their own natures. Charles, he was impulsive, his watch a reflection of his carelessness. Vivian, she was meticulous, but her fear of exposure led her to hide the locket, a mistake that betrayed her. The human heart, it cannot help but reveal itself." Hastings shook his head, a wry smile. "Won't be the same without her. And poor Charles, whatever his crimes, he was her nephew." Poirot nodded, his expression softening. "Oui, it is a tragedy. But justice, it is served. And that is the duty of Hercule Poirot. Now, we leave this place, and we carry with us the lesson. The truth, it is patient, but it is relentless." As they prepared to depart, Poirot gathered his coat and hat,
his movements precise and deliberate. The butler, Withers, appeared to see them out, his face etched with gratitude. "Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings," he said, bowing slightly, "the house owes you a debt. Lady Eleanor's memory is honored by your work." Poirot inclined his head. "Merci, Monsieur Withers. But it is not for honor that I work, but for order. The world, it must make sense." As they stepped into the waiting car, the gravel crunching beneath their feet, Hastings glanced back at Thornfield Grange, its ivy-clad walls gleaming in the morning light. "Back to London, then?" he asked. "Oui, mon ami," Poirot replied, settling into the seat, his eyes already distant, as if contemplating the next puzzle. "To London, and to rest, until the little grey cells are called upon again." The car pulled away, leaving the estate behind, its secrets now exposed, its shadows dispelled by the unrelenting logic of Hercule Poirot. Chapter 12. Echoes of the Past. The train to London rattled gently through the Sussex countryside, its rhythmic clatter a soothing counterpoint to the tumult of the past days at Thornfield Grange. Hercule Poirot sat by the window in their first-class compartment, his small hands folded neatly over a copy of the Times, though his eyes were fixed on the passing fields, lost in thought. Captain Hastings, seated opposite, fidgeted with his cufflinks, his mind still entangled in the web of deceit they had unraveled. The arrest of Charles Ashby and Vivienne Laurent had brought closure to the murder of Lady Eleanor Ashby.
Yet enemies, her will, her secrets, her influence, these were not born in a vacuum. I have been reflecting on a detail, a small thing, that emerged during our time at the Grange. The alchemical manuscript in the library. It was not merely a valuable artifact, but a symbol of something older, something that connected Lady Eleanor to a history she guarded closely. Hastings's brow furrowed. "The manuscript? But you said it was a shadow motive, a distraction. Do you think it played a bigger role?" Poirot set the newspaper aside, his fingers steepled. "Not in the murder itself, perhaps, but in the why of it all. This morning, before we left, I spoke again with Withers, the butler. He is a man of discretion, but loyal to Lady Eleanor's memory. He revealed that the manuscript was not merely a collector's item, but part of a family legend, a text rumored to contain secrets of wealth and influence, passed down through the Ashby line. Lady Eleanor had been researching it, consulting scholars in secret, as if seeking to unlock its mysteries." Hastings's eyes widened. "Good heavens, Poirot, you don't mean to say she was killed over some ancient alchemical nonsense?" Poirot shook his head, his expression grave. "No, Hastings, not nonsense. To some, such secrets are worth killing for, not for gold, but for power." Lady Eleanor's inquiries had stirred interest, perhaps among those beyond Thornfield Grange. Charles and Vivienne, they acted for their own reasons, greed, fear of disinheritance. But I wonder if they were unwitting pawns in a larger game, one Lady Eleanor herself did not fully understand. Hastings leaned back, his mind racing. But who else could be involved? The other guests, Felix, the Graysons, Mrs. Langston, Colonel Ramsay, they all had their secrets, but you cleared them. Poirot's eyes narrowed, his voice low. "Cleared, oui, of the act of murder. But secrets, they do not end with one crime." Felix Marwood, his resentment toward Lady Eleanor was not merely artistic. He hinted at Hastings nodded, though his unease lingered. "You're a marvel, Poirot. Most men would call it a day, but you're already chasing shadows." Poirot chuckled, a rare warmth in his tone. "Shadows, Hastings, are where the truth hides. And Hercule Poirot, he does not let the truth escape." As the train rolled on, the countryside giving way to the outskirts of London, Hastings felt a strange mix of awe and apprehension. Thornfield Grange was behind them, its secrets exposed, but Poirot's words suggested that the story was not yet complete. The echoes of Lady Eleanor's life, her power, her secrets, her enemies, would linger. And Hastings knew that Poirot, with his relentless pursuit of order, would follow them wherever they led. The compartment fell silent,
save for the steady rhythm of the train. Poirot opened his newspaper once more, but his eyes were distant, already tracing the invisible threads of a mystery that refused to be fully resolved. Chapter 13. A Whisper of Doubt. The London flat of Hercule Poirot was a haven of order, its polished surfaces and neatly arranged furnishings a stark contrast to the tangled web of Thornfield Grange. The late afternoon light filtered through the lace curtains, casting delicate patterns on the hardwood floor as Poirot sat at his desk, a cup of tisane steaming beside him. His small hands were busy sorting a stack of letters and notes, each meticulously catalogued, a testament to his unrelenting pursuit of precision. Captain Hastings, sprawled in an armchair by the fire, flipped through a newspaper, though his attention kept drifting to his friend, whose contemplative silence suggested the case was far from closed in his mind. "Poirot," Hastings said, setting the paper aside, "it's been 3 days since we left Thornfield Grange. Charles and Vivian are awaiting trial, the police are satisfied, and yet you're still poring over notes. What's nagging at you? You said yourself the little grey cell
Him weeks before her death. She sought to verify the manuscript's authenticity, believing it contained coded instructions, not for alchemy, but for a hidden fortune, perhaps tied to the Ashby estate's history. Hastings's eyes widened. A hidden fortune? Good Lord, Poirot, that's the stuff of adventure novels. You don't think Charles and Vivian knew about this, do you? Poirot shook his head, his moustache twitching slightly. No, I believe their motive was simpler. Greed for the inheritance, fear of disinheritance. But Lady Eleanor's inquiries, they stirred interest elsewhere. The manuscript's value was not widely known, yet someone at Thornfield Grange was aware of it. I suspect this knowledge contributed to the tension that led to her death, even if indirectly. Hastings rubbed his chin, his mind racing. But who? Felix Marwood, with his talk of betrayal, Mrs. Langston with her obsession with artifacts, or someone outside the house entirely? Poirot's gaze drifted to the window, where the London skyline loomed in the fading light. That is the question, mon ami. Let us consider the guests once more. Felix Marwood, his resentment was real, but his actions were too overt, too theatrical, to suggest a deeper conspiracy. Mrs. Langston, her interest in the manuscript was genuine, but her fear of exposure as a liar suggests she lacked the nerve for murder. Dr. Grayson and his wife, they were entangled in Lady Eleanor's web of influence, but their secrets were personal, not connected to the manuscript. Colonel Ramsay, he is a man of bluster, but his indignation felt authentic. Hastings leaned back, exasperated. So we're back to square one. If none of them are involved in this manuscript business, who is? Poirot's eyes narrowed, a spark of realization flickering. There is one figure we have overlooked, Hastings. The one who moves in the shadows. Withers may be innocent, but the doubt, it persists. I will await the inspector's reply. And in the meantime, we watch, we listen. The echoes of Thornfield Grange, they reach even to London. The clock on the mantel chimed 5, its gentle toll a reminder of the passing hours. Hastings glanced at Poirot, whose expression was serene yet resolute, a man undaunted by the complexity of human motives. What now, then? Hastings asked. Do we return to Sussex? Non, mon ami, Poirot replied, rising from his desk. For now, we remain here. The truth, it has a way of finding us, if we are patient. But rest assured, the manuscript, the secrets of the Ashby family, they will not remain buried forever. As the London dusk settled outside, Poirot returned to his notes, his mind already tracing the faint outlines of a new puzzle. Hastings, watching his friend, felt a familiar mix of admiration and unease.
The case of Thornfield Grange was closed, yet its echoes lingered, and Poirot, with his relentless pursuit of truth, would not rest until every whisper was silenced. Chapter 14. The Hidden Thread. The fog of London hung heavy outside Hercule Poirot's flat, cloaking the city in a grey shroud that mirrored the lingering mystery of Thornfield Grange. Inside, the room was a bastion of order, its polished surfaces reflecting the soft glow of a single lamp. Poirot sat at his desk, a telegram from Inspector Blake open before him, its content studied with the intensity of a scholar deciphering an ancient text. Captain Hastings, pacing restlessly, paused to peer over his friend's shoulder, his curiosity piqued by Poirot's uncharacteristic silence. "Anything from Blake, Poirot?" Hastings asked, his voice tinged with impatience. "You've been staring at that telegram for ages. Has he found something about Withers?" Poirot's green eyes flickered up, a spark of satisfaction in their depths. "Oui, mon ami. The good inspector has been most thorough. The telegram..."
Précisément. The manuscript, it is said to contain coded instructions to a hidden fortune, perhaps land, perhaps wealth, perhaps influence, buried in the Ashby estate's history. Withersby's former employers, the Harcourts, believed they had a right to it, a claim that predates Lady Eleanor's ownership. Withers, I suspect, entered her service not by chance, but by design, to monitor her inquiries into the manuscript. His loyalty to her was genuine, but it masked a deeper purpose. Hastings sank into an armchair, his mind reeling. So, he wasn't just a butler. He was, what, a spy? But if he didn't kill her, how does this fit with Charles and Vivienne? Poirot's mustache twitched, a sign of his mind at work. The murder. It was a collision of motives. Charles and Vivienne acted for their own reasons: greed, fear of disinheritance, the exposure of Vivienne's false identity. But Withers? He was a catalyst, perhaps unknowingly. His knowledge of the manuscript, his subtle influence in the household, may have heightened Lady Eleanor's suspicions, pushing her to alter her will and confront those she distrusted. This, in turn, drove Charles and Vivienne to their desperate act. Hastings rubbed his temples, trying to follow. So, Withers didn't wield the letter opener? But he set the stage? That's devilishly complicated, Poirot. Poirot chuckled softly, a rare warmth in his tone. The human heart, Hastings, it is never simple. Withers, he played a long game, waiting for an opportunity to claim the manuscript's secrets for his former employers or himself. But murder, it was not his plan, too messy, too disorderly. He preferred to watch, to listen, to guide events from the shadows. Hastings leaned forward, his voice urgent. What now, then? Do we confront Withers? Have him arrested? Poirot shook his head, his expression,
Hastings said, half in admiration, half in exasperation. Even with the murder solved, you're chasing this manuscript like it's the Holy Grail. Poirot's smile was serene but resolute. The truth, Hastings. It is my Grail. The murder of Lady Eleanor was but one chapter in a larger story. The manuscript, Withers, the Ashby legacy, these are threads that lead to a truth yet unseen. And Hercule Poirot, he does not rest until all is revealed. As the fog thickened outside, Poirot returned to his notes, his pen moving with precision across the page. Hastings watched, a familiar awe settling over him. The case of Thornfield Grange had closed one door, but another had opened, and Poirot, with his little grey cells, was already stepping through it, determined to unravel the hidden thread that bound the past to the present. Chapter 15. The Final Veil. The London fog had lifted, revealing a crisp autumn evening that bathed Poirot's flat in a golden glow. Hercule Poirot sat at his desk, a letter from the Oxford scholar open before him, its pages dense with notes on the alchemical manuscript from Thornfield Grange. His small hands were still, his green eyes sharp with focus, as if the words on the page held the final piece of a puzzle that had haunted him since the murder of Lady Eleanor Ashby. Captain Hastings, restless as ever, stood by the window, gazing out at the bustling street below, though his thoughts remained tethered to the events in Sussex. "Poirot," Hastings said, turning from the window, "you've been poring over that letter for hours. Has the scholar found something about the manuscript, or are we still chasing shadows?" Poirot's moustache twitched, a faint smile playing at his lips. "Mon ami, the shadows, they are dispelled at last. This letter, it is the final veil lifted from the mystery of Thornfield Grange. The scholar confirms what I suspected. The manuscript is not merely a relic."
I received a second telegram from Inspector Blake. Withers, or rather Edward Withersby, was apprehended last night attempting to access the library at Thornfield Grange. He carried tools to break into a hidden compartment beneath the floor, where the scholar's analysis suggests the manuscript's secrets point. Withers confessed, not to murder, but to serving as an agent for the Harcourt family, who believed the hidden wealth rightfully theirs. He had been feeding them information about Lady Eleanor's research, hoping to claim the treasure for them, and perhaps for himself. Hastings shook his head, a mix of awe and disbelief. "So Withers was playing a long game, just as you thought. But how does this tie to the murder? Did he push Charles and Vivian to act?" Poirot steepled his fingers, his voice soft but resolute. "Not directly, mon ami, but his presence was a catalyst. Withers's subtle manipulations, his hints to Lady Eleanor about Charles's debts, his whispers to Vivian about her false identity, heightened her suspicions, prompting her to threaten disinheritance. This drove Charles and Vivian to their desperate act. Withers did not wield the letter opener, but his shadow loomed over the crime, a puppet master, unaware of the chaos he unleashed." Hastings exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "It's like a Russian novel, Poirot. All these layers of deceit. So what happens now? Is Withers to be charged?" Poirot's expression grew somber. "Withers faces charges of theft and conspiracy, but not murder. The law, it deals with Charles and Vivian for that crime. The manuscript has been secured by the police, and the hidden cache, it will be excavated under the estate's new executor. The Ashby legacy, it will endure, but its secrets are no longer buried." Hastings leaned back, a wry smile forming. "You've done it again, Poirot. You saw through the fog when the rest of us were blind. But tell me," lifted. But the world, with its endless mysteries, awaited the next act of Hercule Poirot's genius.